Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ana. I was born in Managua, Nicaragua. My mom is from Nicaragua, and my dad is from the Dominican Republic. That makes me both Nicaraguan and Dominican. And I grew up in New York City, in the Bronx, New York. And I was 17 years old when I left home to go to college. I went to a small liberal arts school in a small town in Iowa called Grinnell, Iowa. So I went from, I hear a lot of like, oh. I went from New York City, this fast-paced, diverse city of over 8 million people, to a small town in the middle of nowhere with corn and farms and tractors and cows and nothing I had ever seen before. There were 10,000 people in this small town, and my college has 1,600 people, and less than 100 of them were Latinos. So it wasn't until I faced this huge culture shock that I finally understood and finally appreciated the struggle that my family had gone through to immigrate to the United States. I finally knew how my dad felt. My dad has immigrated 3 times in his life. The first time he immigrated from the Dominican Republic to Russia. In the 1970s, there was a scholarship program at the time. They were recruiting international students. He immigrated from Russia to Nicaragua, where he found a job as a mining engineer. And then he immigrated from Nicaragua to the United States, searching for a better life in a more prosperous country for his family. When my dad arrived in New York City, he arrived in the United States, he arrived in New York City, he didn't know many people. He had one friend, and he rented a bedroom in this friend's apartment. And he had sacrificed this career in engineering. He had left his family back home in chase of this American dream. When my dad came here, he couldn't find any jobs. The only job that he could find was as a cab driver, and he became undocumented. Then in 1986, there was a sweeping immigration reform that allowed my dad and people like my dad to get on a path towards citizenship. While my dad was in New York figuring out his immigration status and his papers, my mom and my sister were back in Nicaragua. This was before I was born. And my dad, he visited as often as he could, as often as his budget would allow him. And then I was born in the early 90s, and a few years later, my dad was finally able to apply to bring my mom, my sister, and I to the United States. And we were so lucky because my dad had been here in the United States at the right time. Not everyone is so fortunate to have, such a straight path to citizenship. When we first arrived, my mom, the only job opportunity she could find was as a housekeeping woman at a Marriott hotel in Westchester, New York. And through a lot of hard work and sacrifice, both my parents were able to go back to school and become teachers. My dad recently retired as a teacher, and my mom is still in New York City working as a teacher. So all my life, I saw my family work really, really hard to support us, to get ahead in this country, to make a life for us. And again, it wasn't until college that this really hit me, this experience that my family had gone through. I was studying science in college, but my heart was really in social justice. I had a passion for helping other immigrants and other Latinos so that they wouldn't have to feel the way that my family felt when we went through this experience. They wouldn't have to feel isolated, they wouldn't have to work in low-wage jobs and have had their families separated for so many years. So after graduation, I found a job as a community organizer at a really awesome organization in Iowa called Iowa Citizens for Community Improvement. And organizing was such a great outlet for me because I could take an active role in helping to lift up this community that I cared so much about. We tackled issues such as worker rights, helping workers organize to end unfair practices and discrimination on the job. We tackled issues such as immigrant rights, where we advocated for an end to deportations and the separations of families. And this was very difficult work. We faced a lot of hardships and some backlash from the people in power that we were organizing against. And an especially difficult moment for me was in 2013, 2014. And I want to share this story with you because I think it's relevant to the conversations that we're having today. My colleagues and I were fighting to stop the deportation of one of our members, Constantino. Constantino was one of our best members. He always had a very positive attitude. He was a community leader. He led community meetings and rallies. He advocated for the rights of undocumented workers in Iowa like himself. He was all around an amazing person. And Constantino arrived in the United States in 2010. He was fleeing drug and gang violence in Mexico. In his hometown, Constantino was a police officer, and one day the members of the local cartel came up to Constantino and gave him two options. They said, you can either work with us or you can die. So Constantino fled to the United States. He didn't want anything to do with the cartel. He always was an honest man. And he was forced to leave his wife and children in Mexico. And he arrived in Des Moines, where he had a few other family members at the time. He started working. He worked 2 jobs at restaurants. And one day on his way to work, a police officer stops him. And they find out that he is driving without a license. They find out that he's undocumented. And fast forward a few months, and as Constantino's coming out of work, there are immigration officers waiting for him outside of his job to detain him. So Constantino goes through the immigration court process. He is eventually released, but he's sentenced to a voluntary departure, which means that he has to leave the United States by a certain date. And he fought against this ruling. He applied for asylum. He told the judges that if he had to go back to Mexico, that the cartel members would kill him. And as a community, we fought alongside him. Constantino wanted to share his story. He shared his story in front of lawmakers and at press conferences and at rallies. We drove calls to ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, asking them to stop his deportation. And we visited our senator's office asking for some type of relief. Nevertheless, he was denied the asylum application and was forced to return to his hometown. And a few months after he returned to his hometown, we all received the news that Constantino had been found dead. And he had been gunned down by members of the cartel right outside of his home, and his son was the one to find his body. So the outcome that we all feared the most happened, and it came true. And Constantino warned everyone that this would happen. And yet the immigration system failed to protect him. So his family fled to the United States, and about a year after he died, some of his children were granted asylum. So it was very unfortunate that Constantino's death is what finally opened the eyes in this judge's view. So this was all very heartbreaking and devastating. The only sense of peace or justice or relief that his family can get is that they can have a future in this country. And this was very hard for us as a community. It was very difficult for me personally. And what I learned from my parents is that you can't stop. You can't stop fighting for the world that you want to live in. You can't stop fighting for what you believe in. And I believe that immigrant rights are human rights. And we can't stop fighting. And I'm sharing this to say that if you feel the same way, then you can do something. You can take action. We need you all to get involved. I moved here to Chattanooga a few months ago with my partner who moved here for business. And there's some amazing work that's happening here in Chattanooga. And we need everyone's help to begin changing the narrative around immigration, to begin changing the outcomes of these stories. Whether it's donating to a local organization, volunteering, calling your legislator, and talking to them about the issues that you care about, or running for office yourself. We need you all in this time. And just to wrap up, I want to say that before I left home when I was 17, I didn't understand all of this immigrant experience. It took me experiencing a culture shock of my own at a later age. It took me getting involved in social justice to learn about the issues that our community is facing. And it took me learning a little bit more about my family's immigration story in order to really understand this experience of Latinos and immigrants in the United States. So I share my story with you today. I share my family's story with you. And I share Constantino's story with you so that you too can better understand the immigrant experience a little bit more. And that you can help in making Chattanooga and Tennessee a more welcoming place for immigrants and for people of all walks of life. Thank you.